So, welcome everyone on a lovely sunny afternoon. And thank you for being here despite the lovely sunny afternoon. I want to give you an update on Erich and on the research done by Erich since we last spoke, which is in Crete 2 years ago. I also gave an update on the research of Erich, although I didn't have a voice at the time. And that was a whole story with Greek throat doctors and morphine and other aspects. But I had a voice by Saturday morning and delivered the talk. So I first want to thank the committee for organizing this beautiful consultation so far. I think that in between all the running, because we've seen you running, we've seen you posting things online last minute, we've seen you doing updates. Thank you so much for giving us this wonderful opportunity to meet and to learn. What I want to do with you today is two things. I know that some of you don't live with Erich every day like I do. So I would like to give a brief recap of Erich so far, so that everyone is a bit up to speed or on the same level. And then I would like to present three researches. And these three researches I chose because of the theme of the consultation. Fragility, and that's where I want to talk about suicide prevention and the research we've done so far in Erich. And on the other hand, also resilience of chaplains, which has come to the forefront time after time in this consultation. And that's why we also developed the research on big stories, which is what I want to introduce to you today and also later this afternoon in a workshop. So if you don't know which workshop yet, I will convince you. So this is the plan. So 7 years ago, well, Erich has been active since 7 years. And it all started, actually, we've been talking during lunch about this in 2010, and before the consultations in 2010, research didn't have a place at the table at the consultations. And we've been gradually introducing research, and in 2014 we came together in Salzburg and we made a statement out of the consultation stating we need to be researched, informed. I'm sorry, I'm out of the reach of the microphone, sorry. We need to have more and more, we need the profession of chaplains to be research informed. And at the same time, because we had some, contra noise about, yes, but all this professionalism and we have a calling and a vocation and, and then we had a statement, a Salzburg statement that said spirituality and research, they go hand in hand. And that's why I have two researches on professionalism and one research on spirituality today to introduce to you, because they go hand in hand. And then in 2016 in Debrecen, 94% of the participants of the consultation voted for a research institute that would be connected to the European Network of Healthcare Chaplaincy and that would do research on chaplaincy. And thus, the next year, in 2017, Erich saw life in Leuven. Because we thought if we have a research institute, it needs to be tied to a bigger academic setting. And we chose then the University of Leuven to connect it there so it would help us with grants and with research development. And indeed, we did get a grant of 300,000 euros to start with Erich. Yeah? And this is what we did. With that money, you know where research money goes to. It's to hiring people who do the research. And so, yeah, it's inevitable. So I paid Austin Snowden and Ewan Kelly, because we started then from 2017 to 2019 with setting up PROM research. PROMS is patient-reported outcome measures, and they developed a patient-reported outcome measure for spiritual care, which is, of course, what we all think now is important, but truly, Scotland was the first to introduce it in the area of spiritual care, saying we need to hear the voice of the patient about chaplaincy. So for those who don't know the PROM spiritual care, there are a massive amount of articles out there where, you know, well, Lindsay already made it clear also in her presentation about her research. You know, the chaplain visits the patient afterwards, a researcher visits the patient, asks some questions. The patient can also narratively talk about the chaplain. The chaplain makes some notes, both are compared, and we see what the impact is. As I said before in Crete, through all the research based on the PROM spiritual care, we can no longer deny that chaplains have impact on the anxiety level of patients. That chaplains have impact on inner peace of patients. And that chaplains do give space to patients to talk what's about on their mind that day. And this is a famous article of Austin Snowden, who wrote, "What's on your mind today?" Because he wanted to bridge the gap between research and praxis of chaplains and say, listen, you know, if you ask the question, and we talked about that, if you ask the question, you know, how are you every time, it can be burdensome to answer that question all the time as a patient. But if you know from the research that it's important for patients themselves to talk what's on their mind, then you can ask, what's on your mind today? That's precisely the article that Austin wrote about the PROM outcomes. So until 2009, we were very busy with the PROM spiritual care. And then we differentiated in research. We started with the now famous COVID-19 research together with Australia Spiritual Health and with Transforming Chaplaincy and Chaplaincy Innovation Lab in the US. We teamed up during the COVID period because, as Joost said, all my colleagues are saying that COVID changes our praxis in a very fundamental way. So we said, this is something that we need to research. So we researched chaplaincy praxis until after the first wave of COVID. And what we massively could conclude was that from patient care, chaplains turned to staff care. But there was also a lot of creativity going on around new rituals, new practices, new ways of putting chaplaincy on the table. And if you want to read about that, there's a special issue in the Journal of Pastoral Care and Counseling that is devoted to that research, where several among you have cooperated in, and thank you for that. We also went into charting and documenting, which is, I think, a very important thing. We wrote with several researchers the white paper because we noticed that there is a need to discuss charting, documenting among chaplaincies in Europe. Some chaplaincies and some chaplains don't have access to electronic patient files. Others are charting regularly as a normal case, and in between there are a lot of nuances. And we wanted to write a white paper that put all the pros and cons together and came with a vision. And this is for you to consult. The white paper needs to open the discussion, put foundations down for discussions, and help chaplaincies think about documenting and charting. We are in the process of developing a taxonomy based on that white paper, because we saw that every chaplain likes to invent the warm water regarding documenting and charting, and a lot of effort and energy goes into that and improving your own systems. So we thought if we could, it's not possible even in Europe to speak the same language between 27 countries, but if we could have a language that could be considered like a touchstone or an inspiration to others, to other chaplaincies to start charting with or to document with, it would be great. I have big dreams. Now the praxis, right? So the structure of Erich is, I was asked back then to be the director of Erich, and I still am. There was in the beginning a senior researcher, which was Austin Snowden, and then there was a coordinator, which was Ewan Kelly, and he was consequently, when he left, several among you took for a short period that time, that position, and helped doing the, all the administration and invitations and things that are mere business side, to have that on board. We had a board and an innovation forum. The board was there to see what we did with the grant, and the innovation forum was there to bring new ideas about research paths that were important. But today we're at a different place, and I want, after 7 years and having done a lot, and I think that we really accomplished that Erich is on the map internationally as the European Research Institute that can produce research based on European chaplaincies, and that goes back to the praxis. So that's, I think, the most important achievement of the past years. But we also have to look forward. And Austin is currently half retired, but he wants to just continue working with us because he says always, I just love chaplains. What I did more is, what I did more is involve people that I work with now, because the money is gone, so you turn to other forces. And currently I have Serena, who takes care of the newsletters and the website. I have Conchita, who is here, who sends out mails and does invitations and so on. And I also want to introduce you to Sylvia, who many of you have met. She is a chaplain in the university hospitals, a doctor in ethics, theology of ethics, and she has volunteered her time to work for Erich and do research. So I have a new research coordinator amongst us, which is amazing. Gerardo represents Erich in the ENHCC committee, and then Elspeth and Gudrun, of course, represent ENHCC in Erich, and that's supposed to be the structure. But I am at a point where for the coming 7 years, because it's, 7 years we've done, the next 7 years, how is it going to look? I want to have a more flexible structure, because organically the 2 previous structures have run out their time. We don't need an innovation forum because we get so many ideas from many of you through online surveys of what we need to research. And also the board doesn't look after finances anymore, and we're not having an official, separate, independent position. So why do we need a board? We need a more flexible and dynamic structure. So in a first meeting, and I want to be really transparent about this, in a first meeting with Geraldo and Elspeth and Gudrun, we are working on a new context and concept where we would have one steering committee for Erich, where there are fixed members, of course, the director of Erich, the coordinator of Erich, the coordinator of ENHCC, a member of the steering committee of the ENHCC, a representative of Erich in the steering committee of ENHCC, and so you see that the 2 organizations keep being entangled and connected with each other, which I think is life-giving. And then we would have 4 senior EU researchers who would commit for a period of 4 years, and 2 junior EU researchers who would also commit for a period of 4 years. And I will explain to you how that would work based on the researches that we've done, because out of the praxis of the last years, this model grew actually. And this is what we want to consolidate in order to serve chaplaincies in the European community more. The goals of Erich remain the same, of course, to initiate research, to promote the importance of research in spiritual care by chaplains, because there's a lot of research done on spiritual care, but by chaplains, that is something else. Now, it's incomparable to where we were 20 years ago, and in that sense, I have a lot of hope, because meanwhile, there's so much research, and that is very good. To provide education, resources, mentorship, and I hope with the new structure that we will also meet those goals, also to seek collaboration and dialogue, and to translate, which is no longer necessary because of DeepL, publish and disseminate existing research. These are the goals that we were working with, and we can already adapt. So that's, I think, where we are with Erich at this point after 7 years, before we go into the next 7. Are there any questions at this point regarding what I've said or presented? Yeah, Rosie?
Will you say something more about, in the next 7 years, the 4 senior EU researchers and the 2 junior? And have you thoughts on the areas they work on, or that's open space?
Yes, I think that's something that we need to discuss further, but you will get more what it means if I go to the first research, actually, because I will make it more clear then. But I think that Elsbeth, Gudrun, Gerardo, and I have to explain and disseminate more what that means. But you will get an insight in a few minutes. Yeah? Yes. All right. Let's go to the first research. And immediately, I think I can explain how it will work. This is Serena. Serena comes from Australia. She came to study at KU Leuven, a good choice. And she did her research master there in English. And at the same time, she obtained a graduate certificate in suicidology in Australia. She did an internship in university chaplaincy, and now she's a doctoral researcher at KU Leuven. She would have been here and introduced research herself were she not doing currently an internship in the Australian Institute for Suicide Research and Prevention as part of her doctoral research. So what is this? This is a junior researcher doing a PhD who needed some research into suicide prevention. And she was thinking, and she said, well, who has the most experience in suicide prevention from the point of view of spirituality? Chaplains, yes, you, and specifically mental health chaplains, right? So she turned to Erich and said, could I do, under your leadership, because I'm also her supervisor, could I do a focus group with mental health chaplains? Because I want to hear from them what they think they do to prevent suicide with patients. And so this is the first research. And you see how it would work? Junior researcher, senior researcher, junior researcher needing a network, needing promotion, needing a platform for surveys, needing the connections and the guidance. Senior researchers being available to do this guidance and to support the research. So this is what happened. We started from the questions, okay, all healthcare chaplains, not only mental health healthcare chaplains, but all healthcare chaplains are involved in suicide prevention, one way or the other. Mental health chaplains probably have more experience. And there is really a lack in research in mental health chaplaincy. Look at all the presentations here at a consultation. There really is a lack into mental health chaplaincy research. And so if we look at the broader literature, which Serena did, of course, there is a huge gap in the research regarding the perspective of spirituality and suicide prevention. So that would be two goals met at once. We would do research regarding mental health chaplaincy, and we would add to the research in prevention of suicide based on spiritual care. So the first thing we did is look for people in the European context who had experience, who work in mental health care and have experience. And so we came upon Ulla and Thomas, Josh, David, Birgitta, and Martijn, who is also a co-supervisor of Serena's. And we started with focus group. We met 3 times, and we provided questions for the participants. And Serena transcribed the talks and did thematic analysis based on the talks. And so we started with thinking, what do you consider your good practices regarding preventing suicide with patients who are suicidal? What do you do? And what would you consider typical interventions that you recognize, this is what I do not once, coincidentally, but multiple times? We have an article ready for you, published about the research in the Journal of Pastoral Care and Counseling. So I just want to also take the opportunity to lead you into the suicide prevention thinking, because that's essential, I think, to understand the research. And I don't want you to think that you will sit here passively for an hour and a half. I would say, mind what I'm talking about, because then you will discuss among each other if you recognize the interventions, if you ever have used them in your praxis. And I want to hear about that afterwards. But anyway, we started from the basic presumption, and based on literature, of course, supported by literature, that suicidality is a spiritual concern, because it's basically about a lack of meaning in life, a lack of hope, and a lack of belonging. Now, these 3 things, if you put them positively, are a spiritual concern. This is what we do with patients. So we have every right to do research and think about the prevention from the point of view of spirituality. We also made a difference between fatal suicidal behavior and non-fatal suicidal behavior based on the literature, where fatal suicidal behavior, of course, refers to suicide and succeeded suicide, which then made us talk about the family and support of family and grieving and counseling and everything that came with that. But also non-fatal suicidal behavior, suicide attempts, self-harm, suicidal ideation, death wishes. There is a lot of differentiation to make. And the third point of start was actually what the literature does is make a distinction between primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. And we, in our discussions, talked about prevention, intervention, and postvention to make it easier. Before, during a crisis, and after a crisis. How can you prevent further attempts, and so on? And we tried to translate that to chaplaincy actions. Primary prevention means everything that happens in society to decrease the level of suicide and to increase the well-being of population without thinking of the risk of suicide necessarily. And what do chaplains do daily, I think? They contribute to primary prevention because of the fact of what they do in the conversations, namely strengthening resources. Talking about resources, talking about, what is it that you can do yourself? Resilience. This is stuff that we contribute on that level of prevention. The second level is when risk factors appear and suicidal ideation comes to the surface. And so what do chaplains then do? They can, for example, train healthcare professionals to also notice spiritual distress as a predictor of suicide attempts. That is something you can do in prevention. And the tertiary prevention is, those who really engage in suicidal behaviors. And one of the things that we can do next to the grieving and the counseling and all of that is one of the things that came out of the research, namely asking confrontational questions in the midst of a suicidal crisis. And maybe some people are thinking, what, confrontational questions? We'll talk about it. Okay. So out of the focus conversations came, first of all, the conclusion that timing is of the uttermost important for spiritual care. It makes a difference if you are meeting a patient before or after a suicide attempt, or even during a suicide attempt. This is really important regarding interventions because, it depends if you are establishing a connection with the patient, trying to maintain a connection with the patient, or develop a connection further. Confrontational questions, when do you ask them? It very much depends on the timing. Where are they? But in the tertiary prevention, when it's really critical, all the chaplains that were there thought that asking confrontational questions is a key intervention. And there are some examples given. For example, what is standing between you and death? Can you postpone your attempt? Can I make you interested in living for one day more? Just one day more, until I see you again tomorrow, until I call you again tomorrow. What can I do? What can you do to prevent another attempt is a confrontational question after a suicide attempt, for example. So these are confrontational questions. They don't tiptoe around. They go in straight because it's not a taboo anymore if you ask them. And you're giving space to the patient to talk about something he cannot or she cannot talk about with family members, maybe. So, indeed, the next thing that came to the forefront in the focus groups is fundamental attitudes of the chaplain towards patients who are suicidal. They talked a lot about space, physical space. It's so important to have a room where they feel safe to talk about suicide, and not on a room where there are 2 patients or 4 patients, or in a living room where other patients come. No, a safe physical space, but also, a figurative space where taboos can be broken, where you can talk about against the current time paradigm of you need to excel. Instagram, Snapchat is all about excelling. And the pressure on people to lead a perfect life is, especially young people, is very high. So this is a place where you need to talk about the fact that life is not like that. There can be failure. You can be average, and that's okay. On the contrary, it will lead you maybe to more happiness than having to excel all the time. So that's the first thing, allowing space. Second thing, a relational approach. Of course, I don't need to explain a lot about that, where the chaplain uses the relationship with the patient as a source of meaning, where that's imperative also to have and build trust. And it's also the way to validate that that other human being is worthy to have a relationship with. Confidentiality came back a lot, which in some countries is limited because of national safety laws, where you need to break confidentiality when a patient is suicidal, because you can't carry that risk by yourself, and the patient needs an interdisciplinary approach at that point. Now we come to the appropriate interventions that the chaplains distinguished during the focus groups. 6 of them. So those 6 of them, I want you to think if you recognize them, if you use them ever, and then we hold a group talk about that. All right? Holding hope. That was an important one. Chaplains should never give up hope for their patients. Identify hope, work with it. The meeting in itself can inspire or provide a sense of hope with a patient. That's the first one. Second one, very interesting, working with shame and guilt. Guilt and shame are 2 different things. Guilt has 2 layers. There's a layer that can easily be fixed, and there is a deeper existential layer. Shame is much harder to deal with because it's about who you are. It's about your identity. So chaplains knew the difference, and they said, well, in working with guilt and shame, we see one thing that works very well. It's working with peer support groups, where where the fact that you feel ashamed and that you feel guilty is recognized and shared. Also, for chaplains, it was important to find a way to share or ease the burden, even if it meant sometimes carry the burden of guilt or shame for the patient. And rather than deny or push it away, the guilt and the shame, it was given space to be there. Working with the bereaved was focused on one point, namely the sense of shame and guilt they had. We should have prevented this. We should have seen this coming. We should have done this. We should have done that. And one of the interventions was to remind them of their humanity. There are so many things beyond our control, also for chaplains themselves. Despite all their energy put into preventing suicide, we need to accept that not all suicides can be prevented. Second intervention. Third intervention, working with meaning. Rather than giving meaning to someone else's suffering and saying, well, please keep alive because you have grandchildren, that should give meaning to your life. Which is imposing your meaning onto someone else's life. And also, don't think of meaning as something big that needs to be there immediately. No, it can be enjoying a cup of tea in the sun for that patient at that point. And for you all, too, probably, at this time. Why are we here? Existential question. Again, the support groups were mentioned. So, and then the fourth intervention is, keep with the patient. Keep being with the patient. Stay with the patient. Your relationship with the patient is an important source. We use it as an intervention. It may even assist in finding meaning. as a chaplain said, I have one patient who came in for suicide, is now out again. I am the only person he sees every 2 weeks. And this is the fact that gives meaning to his life at this point. So I keep doing this, right? And then prayer and rituals, intervention number 5, where it went from when I meet a religious patient and I'm religious myself, there's always a third person present. The transcendent is there. Rituals and prayers are there to reframe, to change the meaning, or to liberate someone from suicidal ideation sometimes. Take the pressure off. It's a source of hope and peace, or it can be a closure after a time of being suicidal, for example. And then, to my surprise, there was a 6th intervention, namely working with gender stereotypes. And that intervention was based on, men really suffer under the image of, I have to be strong and healthy. I can't be suicidal. And so working with that, and the other way around actually for women, if you don't cry as a woman, then you're hard, right? So it's kind of working with these gender stereotypes was important in working with suicidal patients, where accepting weakness and meaninglessness as part of life was one of the interventions. Okay, let's go again. Dismantle gender stereotypes, prayer and rituals, working with meaning, following up on patients, holding hope, working with shame and guilt. Please exchange with your neighbors what you recognize and what is new to you. Two minutes. Let's see. All right. Would you like to share, who would like to share something that was new to you in this context? Yeah?
For example, in Czech, we have a law that we have to prevent suicide, and when we know about somebody who wants to perform
Yeah.
suicide, we should refer him to some, and it can be something against confidentiality, and he.
Yes. 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 So that is what you recognize, because that's in the presentation indeed, that in some countries confidentiality is limited because of the law. And that is something indeed that is in Czech Republic, that is in the UK, that is in some other countries too. By law, you have to break confidentiality. Yes, yeah. That's something that so many of you are recognizing. Okay.
Yeah, we were talking about dismantle gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
But I have a question, especially for care for elderly people. I can imagine there are also age stereotypes.
Yes.
And how to work with that.
It's a very good question. So, what did you drop, Daniel? Okay. That was not so hard. Who said that? Okay. So, yes, we didn't, the focus group didn't talk about that. So that's a good question. There are age stereotypes, and how do we deal with them in chaplaincy and prevention of suicide? But the male-female gender stereotypes that were talked about are relatively new to some, I noticed. Also in the next survey you will see that. Yes?
Just to follow up on that, gender stereotypes, gender sensitivity
Yeah.
pops up in my head with students who are struggling with their
Yeah.
non-binary
Yes. Yes.
identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of them are in psychiatric
Yeah.
mental health
Yes.
institutions.
Yeah.
Some are or have suicidal thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So to be gender sensitive in chaplaincy, that popped up and
Yeah.
experienced that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Again, the focus group only talked about male, female, and especially male stereotypes. Now, do you see that a focus group is a form of qualitative research that cannot be generalized and that is not capable of integrating every possible nuance or every possible opinion? Focus groups are skipping things. That's why they need a follow-up, right? So that's what we did. We did do a follow-up, and so I will present that in a minute. Anything else that you wanted? Yes?
In the U.S. military, the chaplains became suicidologists, essentially informal suicidologists, to the point where they would lead suicide prevention discussions.
Yeah.
To the point where sometimes people would come to the chaplains and say, "Hey, chaplain, I'd like to talk to you. Don't worry, I'm not suicidal." And because it became almost a joke.
Yeah.
But the problem was there to the point where the chaplains also took repeated courses such as Living Works, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training,
Yeah.
where a lot of this was this resonates. The idea that you need to meet the person where they are
Yeah.
and also
Yeah.
Hear their story.
Yes, exactly. But what we took away from this focus group is there are things that you have in common, because we were able to distinguish 6 interventions. And now the next question is, of course, are they shared with a larger group of chaplains? That's how research works. Huh? Now, before we go to that, just a last slide on this research of small good practices that I loved during the focus group. One chaplain from Sweden said, I love using metaphors when talking with suicidal patients. And I ask them sometimes, do you want to be like the bear in Sweden? Do you want to get away from it all and during cold winters just sleep without anyone disturbing you? Is that what you want? And then wake up in spring again? So she used a lot of metaphors. One of the other things was, we have to live with the ambiguity of it all. As chaplains, but also as patients. There is no such thing as black and white. And the third thing was, another good praxis that we discovered was distinguishing in shame. One chaplain talked about white shame and red shame. And red shame is when your cheeks turn red because you're ashamed you did something wrong that touches your identity. But the white shame had to do with, I'm not worthy of being here. So that was a distinction that was made by praxis from a chaplain who found it helpful. All right, so we went to the next step. And we did another research, and thank you to all of you who contributed to the online survey that we put out in January and February of this year. And we were looking for those 6 interventions. Are they common to more chaplains? What about the importance of timing and the basic attitudes? Are there any other good practices that we are missing? Are there any other interventions that we are missing? So we set up an online survey, translated it into English, German, and Spanish. And the purpose of the questionnaire was, again, to contribute to mental health chaplaincy research and to determine whether this was used by a larger group of mental health chaplains. And we also opened the survey to all chaplains working with suicide prevention, whether they work in a general hospital with a psychiatric unit or in crisis intervention or whatever. So we have the preliminary results, 49 participants in Spain. Gerardo used his network. 111 participants who filled it in English, but are not necessarily from English-speaking countries. And then 224 people from German-speaking countries. Most of them, I don't know what we have done. Most work on mental health units or in a mental health clinic, and most have more than 5 years of experience. If you look at the interventions, we split up prayer and rituals, and thus we have more interventions here than we had the 6 ones. But look at them. Asking confrontational questions, 85. Following up, 159. Holding hope, 132 chaplains do that. Offering prayer, offering rituals, 118, 117. Talking about guilt and shame, 114. Working with life stories, 161. Talking about sin, 141. Gender stereotypes, 26. So what we thought would be confirmed, asking confrontational questions, that became like, that was in the focus group again and again. You have to ask confrontational questions. And working with gender stereotypes are not so much confirmed by a bigger group than it was in the focus group. And that's why it's important to do this online survey. So I just want to give you, because of course, in beginning of March, we closed the survey. We are still busy translating, analyzing, and so on. But I want to give you from the German research some sneak peeks. We played with those interventions. How often do you use them in prevention, in intervention, in postvention? So we have to analyze the relationships towards each other statistically. So that's hopefully being done in the coming weeks. But I just want to give you an example of other interventions by one participant. He or she said, I observe resources, strengthen them in prevention, In intervention, I stay with, be there, be part. In postvention, I support the search for perspectives in life. Has a degree of suicidality impacted your spiritual care, and how? Of course it does. The higher the level, the more frequently I seek contact with patients. Now you think, of course, but it's very important to see this in surveys and being confirmed by a larger group of chaplains, because it's a sign of professionality, that the context influences your interventions. The context of the patient, of suicidality, but also, you know, the situation, the personal situation of a patient. Whether a patient lives alone or is in a relationship. Here is a beautiful quote: the prognosis and the age or living conditions of spinal cord injury patients influence the intervention approaches. Strengthening hope must not lead to unrealistic hopes. The focus there is on realizing the dimension of meaning. Another question in the research is, how important are the following basic values to you in prevention, intervention, and postvention? And then we see in prevention, by far, the basic values of compassion and confidentiality stand out. In intervention, the relationship orientation is by far the highest value. Strengthening the relationship, seeing a patient more, visiting more. Postvention, again, compassion and confidentiality come on the first place. So you see that the face is determining also what comes to the front in basic values. There's a lot of written material that we have to go through and analyze in what chaplains wanted to add. And we asked them, and that's the connection with the last research of Big Stories, what inspired you? And I recognize that. I remember I was on call on Christmas Day 1999 in the hospital. And a patient came in dead after a suicide. It was a young woman, pregnant, and she jumped from a building crane, climbed up, jumped down, and was, of course, dead. I had her mother and her sister. And I will never forget that day, because seeing how other people's lives get broken by the suicide forever of someone is something that I recognize here. The experience of supporting families after suicide is what inspires me to do prevention of suicide. But there are many more beautiful examples in the survey. Can you share an inspiring case or example? A lot of examples that we had, but also of postvention when it didn't work out. I know of 2 patients whom I visited at high frequency and who took their own lives. I have to accept and endure that. I think of both people often because I held them in high regard. It's one of the things that I think. And of course, how do you take care of yourself was the last question. And there we have supervision on the first place, mentioned over and over again. Yes, good, Daniel. Yes, very good, indeed. But also spiritual direction, prayer, silence, sports, music, friends, finding joy, living life, loving life, and everything else that we still need. But there is much more to come, so watch the space. We still have to analyze further and then write an article. So we have half an hour left, so I want you to get up and stretch before we go to the third. Stretch, get up. All right, let's start. Third research that we want to present today is that of the big stories. Big stories? Big stories are about meta-narratives. meta-narratives. So the big stories research was actually, it was you who inspired us. During the online consultation we had, many times we thought that we would gather in Crete, but it already always were online consultations. And during one of the consultations of COVID, during COVID, we heard from a chaplain an interesting question, namely, I miss a backup theology. A backup theology for my praxis during COVID. I miss that. And I remember Simon and I being in one small group discussion where this was said, and thinking we need to do something with that. We need to indeed think about the impact of meta-narratives or big stories on chaplaincy. And remember the Salzburg statement said professionalism and spirituality. And so this was a research that we thought, yes, okay, we'll devote a research to spirituality, to what is impacting chaplaincy and what is the lived spirituality or the lived theology, right? We called the preparing group that was in that consultation, online consultation, and then had several online meetings, and then finally met in Crete. We called them the napkin talks. The napkin, because we were in Crete having lunch together, talking about how we would proceed with the online survey, and I only had a napkin to take notes on. And that napkin is still hanging in my office. And it's called, you know, we were called from then on the napkin talks. So we discussed for a long time about questions we would ask chaplains. It changed so many times in our preparation. And then finally we thought we need to do a pilot study. And some of you have participated in the pilot study. And I just want to ask one member who agreed to sacrifice her anonymity for you to talk about how that felt, because we learned from that for our research that followed. Christine. Christine filled in the survey before we changed it. And from her experience we learned, but she also shared some insights in what it did with her.
I found it really difficult because you have to ask yourself, to prioritize in your big stories. It looks like a whole block, your tradition, and by the questions.
Give 3 examples.
Just give 3 examples. I was thinking, which one? So it was really helping me to focus. That was one thing. Another thing, I know I said it was really difficult already in Dutch. So I know I said you have to make a lot of languages because those things you have to write down in
for chaplaincy and for your soul. Yeah, so this is something that we recognize. There were pilot studies of people filling in the questionnaire by themselves, but there were also pilot studies that included filling in the questionnaire in group. And what Christine said, because she's done both, what Christine said goes for the experiences of people who filled it out in group. It was for a few, the first time that a team of chaplains talked about their underlying basic stories, their meta-narratives that inspired them. And indeed, one of the consequences, so we thought we have to promote it also as a group talk tool. Mm-hmm. And that's what we will do in the workshop around big stories. We will use it as a group talk tool and see how you can use it in your home context. But also, actually, it made you more aware of why you do things and how you can maybe bring it in and integrate it more consciously in your praxis as chaplains. So indeed, we listened to the advice of the pilot study. We translated it in Dutch, English, French, Spanish, Czech. We did afterwards thematic analysis after translating everything in English. And it was very promising, but we saw the numbers of people taking the survey, increasing day by day. But we had a total of 23 participants, but only 101 went through with it. So most people clicked on it, filled in background variables, and then saw the questions and decided, I don't have time for this. Or I don't want to make time for this. Or I cannot make time for this right now. And then let it go. So we had a lot of voids, but still we have 101 full surveys. So the average chaplain who filled in the survey is a Christian middle-aged woman, probably working in the UK, working in a general hospital, and has around 10 years of work experience. And this is something also curious. Whenever Erich does a research, 10 or 20 Australians jump on it. And I just want to refer to Lindsay, whose father was a conspiracy theorist. I start to think that from Australia there is a campaign to join the EU instead of the UK. Eurovision, exactly. So you see here who filled in the survey. People were able to identify their own faith. So they identified them with several names. These are the most prominent. Most people worked in a general or acute hospital, and you see the years of experience, right? So those are the three main groups where the participants can be situated. Between 5 and 19 years is the biggest group of participants. So the first question was, what big stories, metaphors, images from your tradition, if any, inspire you and help you reflect on your work as a chaplain? Write down a maximum of 3 examples. So you see here, in line of order, what is on top, and I stopped after 5 votes, right? I thought these are themes that we, out of the thematic analysis, made a code tree. These are the codes of the code tree. And when we recognized the same code, then we counted the number of people who were writing about that as well. Conchita is one, and Ana, Conchita and Ana, it was a Spanish thematic analysis this time. They analyzed the results, and Conchita also made some reflections. This one is by Conchita, right? That Christian sources are also an inspiration for non-Christian chaplains, even for non-religious chaplains. And at the same time, Christian chaplains are inspired by big stories from other religions, but not only religions, but from other traditions, such as, Tao of Healing, Heschel, Han, and the idea of kintsugi. What is kintsugi? For those who don't know it, it's Japanese art. And I just put this one quote because I think for the Czech Republic this might be interesting. One participant said, it's very difficult to use religious meta-narratives to work in the work with predominantly non-religious patients. We lack secular grand narratives. And maybe this is one of the possible narratives that we can use where, a broken and restored life is more beautiful than before. We just want to put this in front of or out here. But also, there are many references to the Bible. Here you see the most common references. And the thing is that chaplains do make the connection between biblical stories and their own behavior or their own actions, and their own service, their own job. Like, for example, Jesus to Bartimaeus saying, "What can I do for you?" is my questions to patients. And that's my inspiration. The Wounded Healer by Nouwen persists in time. That's amazing. That's an amazing result already. All right, some quotes from question 1 of what inspires a forest, a cranach on a beach, the arrival of spring, Jesus' word on the cross. There are a lot of different suggestions. Can you describe, question 2, the impact they have on the spiritual care you offer to patients, relatives, and staff? Again, with chaplains, it's always relational. It helps me, but it also helps others. It increases my presence, my closeness to those in need. It helps me understanding and respecting patients as they are. It helps me understand God's presence. So I want to maybe use horizontal and vertical transcendence in a way to order the themes, the relational transcendence that is horizontal with others, and the vertical transcendence in the answers of the chaplains that concerns the relationship to God. But also there are a lot of answers that concern the general meaning of life, or that have to do with the calling of why I am a chaplain. Some quotes. I have a vocation rather than a job. The Wounded Healer helps me to take time for self-care and reflection. I try my best to meet people where they are. A lot of examples. Then we asked people to say if their meta-narratives have changed because of the pandemic. Just to feel the waters, right? And we had from A to D possibilities, and B came out first. No. My meta-narratives are not changed or did not change with the pandemic. And this reminds me of other research in the military chaplaincy, veteran hospitals, where there was a research done, I think, in 2012, where the daily confrontation with suffering was researched from a point of view of resilience. And it turned out that chaplains were at low risk, not without risk, but low risk for burnout because of a sturdy spirituality. And so this is, I think, illustrated by the fact that this is number one. And that there are people who rightfully say, well, the pandemic has nothing to do with the fact that I change stories, because different phases in my life bring forth different stories that are my meta-narratives. Only 2 people said, well, I lacked the backup theology. And only 1 said different stories were important because of the pandemic. So if we look at that, I said this, okay. We go to question 4. How do these stories help you personally to reflect on various crises that make up a day in the life of a chaplain. We wanted to test really concretely. A day is full of small and big crises. How does it impact you? And here you see the answers that were given. I really like the answers from they enhance my trust in God, to they help me to accept my own limitations and needs, to I identify with the story's characters in the stories that are my meta-narratives, and a whole range in between. And if we reflect on those answers, again, those are codes in the code tree. If we reflect on those answers, we see that the meta-narratives are used as hermeneutical keys. They are the key on crises to understand what is happening with you in chaplaincy, with others in life. And that I think I like a lot, because I support a hermeneutical paradigm of chaplaincy, where you are there to understand the other. This is really nice to see that the survey is confirming that. But also another reflection we can make is the answers that are given by the chaplains, they really also refer to inner strength and inner support. The meta-narratives give people inner support. They also support acts of chaplaincy. Actually, everything Christine just said. And they also refer to the faith or the spirituality or the belief that people have, that chaplains have. Some quotes. Stories are hermeneutical keys, helping to understand issues of pain, marginalization, and healing. I know that I never walk alone. Additionally to stories which rely on the written or spoken word, I also rely heavily on imaginary. I think it's so important to also research, maybe for future research, imagination and the importance of it in chaplaincy for patients, in relation to patients. Working with future stories is, I think, a big part of prevention of suicide, but also of complicated grieving and so on. So, yes, I think that's the one to last. Do these stories, because we wanted to research the relevance of lived spirituality and lived theology for the healthcare context. Do they impact your healthcare context? Or are they something marginalized only from you? So we were looking for the link. And of course, there is a link. The stories, the meta-narratives, they inspire me to see the importance of our service. They call us to serve where we are needed, so they are facilitating a selection process in our work. They help us to understand patient needs. They help us to find our place within the context of healthcare. So we found, I think, a connection. Most chaplains said, yes, there is a connection, but I think the meta-narratives also inspire a kind of critical position of chaplains in the healthcare system. And that came out clearly from the survey. The current state of the healthcare system does not meet the ideals that we get from our meta-narratives. This is also a fact that the survey came to uncover. Some quotes. Definitely, the focus of health, which is caring for those who are sick in some way, should remain, and we must not go too far into economic thinking. You see the critical aspect that comes out of living with the meta-narratives. The last question is a question about other comments, a lot of other comments. I think that it's, I would like to reflect more on this, says it all. So I think it would be interesting to see it developed as a tool that serves chaplains and chaplaincy teams to get in touch with those meta-narratives and to bring forth everything that shows the link between healthcare chaplains and patients be strengthened. So that is the Big Stories research. Article is in the pipeline. We also asked for permission for all those who participate to put stories on the website that will come. So you will have plenty of inspiration from other chaplains on the website of Erich. There are a lot of projects in the pipeline. I won't go into that too much, but here you see some of them. I just really want to leave some time to say thank you to all those who participate in doing research and all those who participated in filling in research or who participated in focus groups. So thank you very much. There is a few minutes time for questions, I think, Gerardo? Yeah.